I had been working at the same company for over 5 years, and in many ways I thought I had built a solid foundation for myself. Every morning I would arrive early, making sure my desk was perfectly organized, my emails sorted, and my schedule mapped out to maximize efficiency. Over the years I had taken pride in being dependable, the person colleagues could rely on when deadlines loomed or when complex problems arose. I had always believed that diligence, integrity, and consistent hard work would eventually be recognized, and that the effort I put into my career would protect me from any serious misfortune. Yet, on that seemingly ordinary Tuesday, everything began to unravel. It started with a routine review of a major project my team had been working on for months. At first glance, everything appeared fine. The spreadsheets aligned, the reports looked accurate, and the metrics seemed to meet the projected outcomes. But something felt off. A tiny discrepancy in the numbers caught my eye, a subtle miscalculation buried deep within the dataset. It wasn't just a minor error. If left unchecked, it had the potential to snowball into a massive financial problem. I remember the moment clearly, my heart sank and my mind raced. I knew I had to double-check everything. I spent the next several hours meticulously reviewing the calculations, comparing data points and cross-referencing previous reports. The more I examined, the more certain I became. This wasn't a simple oversight. The project was at serious risk and the consequences could be catastrophic. I had a moral and professional obligation to bring this to my manager's attention. I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as I prepared to present my findings. I rehearsed how I would explain the situation, how I would convey the urgency without causing panic, and how I could propose solutions rather than simply delivering bad news. I wanted to ensure that my intentions were clear. I wasn't trying to criticize or blame anyone, I was trying to protect the company and the team I had been a part of for years. When I finally approached my manager, I could feel a subtle shift in the air. I explained what I had found, detailing the numbers, highlighting the potential risks, and suggesting steps we could take to correct the issue. For a moment there was silence. I expected questions, perhaps a request for clarification. But instead, I noticed a frown forming on my manager's face, a tension in his jaw that I had never seen before. "You're being overly critical," he said, his voice tight. "You're making waves where there aren't any." I froze. I had expected concern or curiosity, maybe even gratitude for catching something before it became a disaster. But overly critical? Making waves? That was not at all what I intended. I tried to explain further, to emphasize the potential impact, but he waved me off, his impatience growing by the second. Over the next few days, the tension in the office was palpable. Colleagues who once seemed friendly became distant, exchanging glances that I couldn't fully interpret. I felt a sense of isolation creeping in, a gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. Every time I walked into a meeting or entered the workspace, I felt the weight of unspoken judgment, the silent questions about whether I had crossed some invisible line. And yet, even with the fear and the doubt gnawing at me, I knew I had done the right thing. I had chosen integrity over convenience, honesty over self-preservation. It was during this period that I first realized something I hadn't fully acknowledged before. Doing the right thing is often not the easiest path. And sometimes, the consequences of honesty are harsher than the consequences of complicity. I had always believed that hard work and dedication were enough, that integrity would naturally protect me from misfortune. But now, faced with the reality of subtle hostility and growing resentment, I began to understand that the professional world is far more complicated, and often far less just, than I had ever imagined. I spent countless evenings at home replaying the events in my mind, going over every word I had spoken, every reaction I had observed. Did I misjudge the situation? Was my approach too blunt, too forceful, too insistent? The questions were relentless, spinning through my thoughts late into the night, robbing me of sleep. But beneath the uncertainty, beneath the anxiety and the fear, there was a persistent inner voice that reminded me, I acted with honesty, I acted with care, and I acted with integrity. Those principles had not changed even if the world around me seemed to punish them. By the end of the week, the atmosphere had grown increasingly unbearable. I noticed subtle shifts in how my manager and colleagues interacted with me, small but unmistakable signs that my position in the team was becoming precarious. My emails received terse responses, my suggestions were ignored, and during meetings I could feel the invisible barrier separating me from the rest of the team. Each passing day reinforced a painful truth. Speaking the truth had made me a target. And then came the call from HR, a moment that would forever change the trajectory of my life. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost procedural, yet every word hit me like a hammer. "We've reviewed your position and unfortunately, We've determined that you are not a good fit for the team. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. So, disbelief, anger, humiliation, all at once. I couldn't comprehend it. After 5 years of dedication, after countless late nights and weekends sacrificed, after choosing honesty and integrity over convenience, I was being dismissed. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet, and I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of injustice pressing down on me like a physical force. For hours I replayed the events trying to make sense of it. How could doing the right thing, something I had been taught to value above all else, result in such a harsh punishment? The question haunted me, a constant echo that refused to fade. And yet, amid the storm of emotions, a flicker of determination began to emerge. This was not the end. I refused to let their actions define me, to let their short-sightedness dictate the course of my life. I realized in that moment that my journey had only just begun. The firing was not a defeat, it was a catalyst. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about the world, about human nature, and about myself. It challenged me to adapt, to grow, and to seek a path where my values would not be compromised, where integrity could coexist with success. The days after I reported the critical mistake were some of the hardest I had ever faced in my professional life. I expected some tension, perhaps even resistance, but nothing could have prepared me for the subtle hostility that slowly engulfed the office. My manager avoided eye contact, offering curt replies whenever I asked a question. Colleagues who had once been friendly and collaborative now kept their distance. I could feel whispers behind my back, fleeting glances exchanged in meetings, and the occasional awkward pause when I entered a room. It was a stark reminder that honesty often comes with a cost. Speaking the truth, something I had always believed was a virtue, now made me a target. Each day felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of judgment, with every word and gesture scrutinized. The tension wasn't explosive, but the silent pressure was crushing. I questioned myself constantly, had I done something wrong? Was I too blunt? Too insistent? Too meticulous? Then came the email from HR. My heart sank the moment I opened it. The words were calm, procedural, almost clinical, but the meaning was devastating. My employment was terminated immediately. Shock, disbelief, anger, and humiliation crashed over me like a tidal wave. I read the email again and again, hoping for a mistake, some kind of clerical error, anything that could make this nightmare unreal. I sat in my chair, numb, staring at the screen. My mind went blank for a moment, then replayed every interaction I had over the past week. The meeting where my manager dismissed my concerns, the sideways glances from coworkers, the subtle comments that seemed harmless at the time but now revealed their underlying judgment. It was a bitter, humiliating clarity. I had been punished for doing the right thing. As I walked home that evening, the city around me seemed surreal. The lights, the traffic, the ordinary hum of life, all of it felt distant and disconnected from the turmoil inside me. I tried to make sense of it. I had always been taught that hard work, diligence, and integrity were enough to secure a stable, respected position. Yet here I was, cast aside like a disposable asset, all because I chose honesty over convenience. The first few nights after losing my job were sleepless. I replayed the scenario endlessly in my mind, analyzing every decision, every word, every reaction. The self-doubt was relentless. Was I really in the wrong? Had I misinterpreted the data? Was I too assertive? I questioned everything, but beneath the uncertainty, a small, persistent voice reminded me of one undeniable truth. I had acted with integrity. I had done what was right. Gradually, as the shock began to fade, I started to consider my options. Anger and humiliation transformed slowly into determination. I refused to let this moment define me, to let their short-sightedness dictate my life. Losing my job didn't mean I had lost my value, my skills, or my potential. It was painful, yes, but it was also an opportunity, a forced reckoning that pushed me to consider paths I had never dared to take while comfortably employed. I began to map out a plan. I reviewed my finances, evaluated my skills, and reached out to contacts I had neglected during my tenure. I spent long hours researching opportunities, considering freelance work, consulting, and even starting my own business. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, I realized that I had the chance to build something entirely on my own terms, without the constraints and politics of the corporate environment that had stifled me. But the path wasn't easy. There were moments of crushing self-doubt, moments when I felt like retreating into obscurity and giving up. I questioned whether I had the resilience to navigate this new reality. The fear of failure loomed large. And yet, every time I thought of the injustice I had endured, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I would not let them break me. I would not allow the betrayal to extinguish my ambition or my sense of self-worth. The first few weeks after losing my job were the hardest I had ever faced. Every morning, I woke up with a mix of dread and emptiness, unsure how to face the day without the structure and identity my work had given me for so many years. I walked through the city streets, seeing the same offices and familiar faces, yet feeling invisible, as if a shadow had fallen over the life I had carefully built. I questioned everything about myself. Was I too honest, too rigid, too naive? Did I misread the office politics, or was I simply unlucky to encounter such short-sighted leadership? The self-doubt was relentless, gnawing at me even as I reminded myself of one undeniable truth: I had acted with integrity. I had done what was right. But knowing I had done the right thing didn't make the pain go away. Each rejection letter, each unanswered job application, reminded me of the harsh reality. In the real world, integrity isn't always rewarded immediately. Survival required more than honesty. It required strategy, perseverance, and adaptability. I began to map out a plan. I started by taking stock of my skills, experiences, and contacts. I remembered the mentors who had once encouraged me, colleagues who had quietly admired my work, and even clients I had interacted with on minor projects. I reached out to them one by one, seeking guidance, feedback, and opportunities. At the same time, I invested in improving myself. I enrolled in online courses, read extensively about entrepreneurship and consulting, and practiced skills I had never fully mastered. Late nights were spent poring over business strategies and market trends, imagining the possibilities that had been impossible within the constraints of my old job. Each hour of effort became a small victory, a reminder that I still had agency over my life. The struggle wasn't just practical, it was emotional. I had to confront feelings of shame and humiliation, the sense that I had failed not just professionally but personally. Friends and family offered sympathy, but their words could not erase the sting of injustice. Some friends even advised me to let it go and take the first job I could find, but I knew deep down that compromise would feel like surrender. I refused to relinquish my principles even if it meant walking a harder path. Days turned into weeks and gradually I began to see a shift. The first signs of progress were small. A successful freelance project, a positive recommendation from a former colleague, a minor consulting contract that allowed me to regain confidence in my abilities. Each success, no matter how modest, became a stepping stone, reinforcing the belief that I could rebuild my life on my own terms. I also reflected deeply on the lessons I had learned from my old job. I realized that the environment I had been in was toxic in subtle ways. Politics, fear, and short-term thinking often trumped integrity and skill. I resolved never to let myself be trapped in a situation where my values would be compromised again. This reflection became a compass, guiding my decisions about where to work, who to collaborate with, and how to approach my career in the future. The nights were the hardest. When the office lights went dark and the city quieted down, I was left alone with my thoughts. Memories of the moments leading up to my firing haunted me, the way my manager had dismissed my concerns, the subtle smirks from colleagues, the whispered comments that I had overheard. Each memory was a sting, reminding me of the injustice I had endured. Yet, those same nights became my crucible. I began to write down my thoughts, sketch plans, and set goals. I created lists of skills I needed to refine, contacts I could reach out to, and potential business ideas. Writing became a release, a way to channel anger, frustration, and fear into something productive. Slowly, my despair transformed into determination. I also spent countless hours reflecting on why I had been so invested in the corporate structure. For years, I had equated stability with success, believing that climbing the ladder and earning recognition within a company would validate my worth. Losing that structure forced me to confront a harsh truth. True validation comes not from external approval, but from personal integrity and self-belief. I began experimenting with freelance projects, initially small and humble. I offered to help former colleagues on minor assignments, took on short-term consulting work, and even volunteered my skills to local startups in need of guidance. Each project was a test, not only of my abilities but of my resilience. The first few weeks were terrifying. Rejection emails and ignored messages were constant, and I had moments where I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake by leaving the safety of a salaried position. Then came the first small victory. A client I had helped with a critical project sent me a heartfelt message, praising my professionalism, diligence, and honesty. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of pride. It reminded me that my work mattered, that my skills were still valuable, and that integrity, my guiding principle, was a rare and powerful asset in the professional world. I used that momentum to expand my efforts. I reached out to more former colleagues, networked relentlessly, and began building a portfolio of projects that reflected my values. Slowly, opportunities started to compound. What had once seemed like an endless chasm of failure began to look like a series of stepping stones toward something meaningful. Throughout this period, I often reflected on the nature of corporate politics and human behavior. I realized that the very qualities that had led to my firing, honesty, diligence, and willingness to speak uncomfortable truths, were traits that many people envied or feared. In a world where shortcuts and office politics often prevailed, integrity could be threatening. This realization, while bitter, became a source of clarity. I vowed never again to compromise my values for approval or convenience. The emotional struggle continued in quieter, subtler ways. I felt moments of isolation, a gnawing sense that I had been cast aside unfairly. Social media posts from former colleagues flaunting promotions or achievements added to the sting. Yet I learned to redirect these feelings, using them as motivation to focus on what I could control. I found solace in friends who understood my journey, in mentors who offered guidance, and in the quiet satisfaction of seeing my own growth unfold, step by step. By the end of several months, the transformation was evident. I had built a small but steady freelance business, gained recognition for my skills, and regained the confidence that had been eroded by the firing. More importantly, I had forged a deeper understanding of myself. Resilience, perseverance, and integrity were not just values, they were lifelines. Looking back, the struggle itself became a lesson. I realized that setbacks, no matter how crushing, are opportunities in disguise. The journey forced me to evaluate my priorities, sharpen my skills, and cultivate patience and strategic thinking. I learned that success isn't simply about climbing a corporate ladder. It's about creating your own path, rooted in your values and sustained by your determination. After months of struggle, self-doubt, and small victories, I began to see the first true signs of change. The raw pain of being fired was still there, lingering like a shadow, but beneath it, I felt a spark of empowerment I hadn't experienced in years. I realized that losing my job had, paradoxically, opened doors I didn't know existed. It forced me to think creatively, to take risks, and to reclaim agency over my career and my life. The first step was building a solid foundation. I revisited my skills, identifying strengths I had underutilized and weaknesses I could improve. I took advanced courses in project management, financial analysis, and client communication. I practiced tirelessly, applying every lesson I learned to small freelance projects. Each success, no matter how modest, was a reminder that I was capable, that my value wasn't determined by the office politics I had endured. Networking became essential. I reached out to former colleagues, mentors, and clients I had once worked with casually. I was honest about my past experience, sharing the lessons I had learned from being fired and my vision for the future. To my surprise, many people were supportive and even impressed by my resilience. Some offered projects, others shared advice, and a few became partners in the ventures I was beginning to imagine. It wasn't an easy path. Rebuilding requires patience, and I had to navigate rejection, financial uncertainty, and moments of intense self-doubt. There were nights when I questioned if I had made the right decision, wondering if returning to a traditional job would have been safer. But every time I faced a setback, I reminded myself that safety had never been my goal. My goal was autonomy, integrity, and success on my own terms. Gradually, the pieces began to fall into place. I landed a significant consulting project for a small startup, helping them identify and solve inefficiencies that reminded me of the mistakes I had caught at my old company. The project was challenging and the stakes were high, but it validated my expertise and reinforced my confidence. Word of mouth spread, and more clients began seeking my guidance. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. The process of rebuilding was also deeply personal. I had learned to value my own judgment, trust my instincts, and recognize the importance of aligning my work with my principles. I started keeping a journal, documenting each step of my journey, reflecting on lessons learned, and planning future strategies. This habit not only sharpened my focus but also provided a sense of continuity and purpose, anchoring me during times of uncertainty. Each day I pushed myself a little further. I explored new markets, expanded my services, and invested in personal development. I attended workshops, joined professional groups, and engaged in online communities that aligned with my goals. These efforts not only helped me gain knowledge but also connected me with like-minded individuals who offered support and collaboration. Slowly, the web of opportunity one was weaving became tangible, a structure stronger and more meaningful than the job I had lost. The first major milestone came when I secured a larger client, a company with a complex project requiring detailed analysis and innovative solutions. I threw myself into the work, applying every skill I had, thinking critically, and anticipating problems before they arose. The project was a resounding success. My client praised my professionalism, my integrity, and my ability to deliver results under pressure. This achievement wasn't just professional validation, it was personal triumph. For the first time, I truly believed in my ability to succeed independently. Rebuilding also required healing from the emotional wounds of my previous job. I confronted the lingering anger, humiliation, and resentment that had followed me since being fired. I realized that holding on to bitterness would only hinder my growth. Through meditation, journaling, and conversations with mentors, I learned to process my emotions, transforming them into motivation and clarity. Every reflection reminded me that my past hardships were shaping me into a stronger, more resilient individual. As months turned into a year, my consultancy grew steadily. I built a small team of trusted collaborators, each chosen not only for their skill but also for their alignment with my values. Together, we took on larger projects, expanded our client base, and established a reputation for honesty, diligence, and excellence. Unlike my old company, there were no politics or hidden agendas. Every success was a result of skill, effort, and collaboration. Looking back, I realized that the company that had fired me had actually done me a favor, in a way. It forced me out of a stagnant environment, pushed me to take risks I might never have taken, and allowed me to discover a path that was uniquely mine. Ironically, the same people who had dismissed me were now watching from afar as I built a career marked by respect, independence, and success. The most satisfying moments came quietly, in subtle victories rather than grand celebrations. Receiving a heartfelt thank you from a client, seeing my work implemented effectively, or simply recognizing how far I had come since the dark days after my firing, all of these moments reinforced that resilience, integrity, and perseverance are far more powerful than fear or resentment. I also began mentoring others who faced similar challenges, sharing my story and offering guidance. Helping someone navigate a difficult situation, teaching them to value integrity over convenience, and watching them succeed became one of the most rewarding aspects of my journey. It reminded me that setbacks are not just personal trials, they are opportunities to grow, teach, and inspire others. Rebuilding wasn't just about finances or career advancement, it was about reclaiming my sense of self. I learned to trust my instincts, to prioritize values over approval, and to measure success not by titles or salary, but by alignment with my principles and the impact of my work. The process transformed not only my career but my perspective on life, resilience, and human nature. By the end of Part 4, I had come full circle. I was no longer the employee defined by someone else's judgment. I was the architect of my own destiny, the person who had turned betrayal into opportunity, setbacks into lessons, and honesty into a path toward lasting success. The journey had been painful, exhausting, and fraught with uncertainty, but it had forged in me a strength, clarity, and confidence that no job could ever take away. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I had come from that day I was fired. At the time, I felt crushed, humiliated, and powerless. Every fiber of my being questioned whether I had done the right thing, whether my honesty had been worth the price. But today I can see that moment for what it truly was. A turning point. The firing, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for a journey I might never have taken otherwise. The months that followed were a mixture of struggle, learning, and self-discovery. I learned that life doesn't reward honesty in the way we sometimes expect. Speaking the truth can be risky, and those who wield power may resent or fear integrity. But I also learned that the consequences of compromise, of choosing convenience over principles, can be far worse. Integrity became my compass, guiding me through the turbulence, reminding me of who I was and who I wanted to be. I rebuilt my career slowly but deliberately. I invested in myself, my skills, and my network. Every small victory, from securing a freelance project to receiving praise from a client, was a validation that I was on the right path. I discovered strengths I hadn't fully realized before: resilience, creativity, problem-solving, and the courage to face uncertainty head-on. I began to understand that setbacks are not failures. They are opportunities for growth and transformation. One of the most profound lessons came from the emotional journey itself. I had to confront fear, self-doubt, anger, and shame. I had to process humiliation and rebuild my confidence from scratch. In doing so, I discovered that my true strength didn't lie in my technical skills or professional accolades. It lay in my ability to persevere, adapt, and maintain my integrity in the face of adversity. By the time I looked back on the years since being fired, I realized that the world I had feared, The corporate office, the politics, the judgment, was not the measure of my worth. My value was defined by my actions, my principles, and my ability to create opportunities where none seemed to exist. I learned to trust myself, to rely on my judgment, and to take ownership of my life in a way I never had before. And then came the unexpected moment of closure. I learned that some of my former colleagues, including managers who had once dismissed me, were taking note of my success. Emails arrived from clients they had recommended, curious inquiries from people who had doubted me, even apologies whispered long after the fact. I didn't respond with bitterness or resentment. Instead, I allowed my work and my growth to speak for itself. That in itself was the ultimate vindication. The final takeaway from this journey is simple but powerful. Adversity is not a wall, it's a doorway. Being fired, rejected, or dismissed does not define your potential. How you respond, your resilience, courage, and adherence to your principles, does. I learned that life will test you, sometimes brutally, but those tests are the very experiences that shape your character, sharpen your skills, and clarify your vision for the future. Today I am not just surviving, I am thriving. I have a career built on my values, partnerships with people I trust, and the satisfaction of knowing that I stayed true to myself when it mattered most. The experience has made me stronger, wiser, and more confident. I know now that setbacks are temporary, but integrity lasts a lifetime. To anyone watching this, remember, speak the truth even when it's difficult. Stand by your principles even when the world seems against you. Challenges will come, but every obstacle is also an opportunity to rise stronger, smarter, and more determined. Losing a job, facing betrayal, or experiencing failure is never the end. It is the beginning of a journey toward your true potential. And if I could sum it all up in one line, they fired me for speaking the truth, but that truth became the foundation of everything I was meant to build.